today's review, I want to put up a little disclaimer. Today's book, Redeeming Love, is a Christian fiction novel. So, if that is something you are not interested in, this review will be something you are not interested in. I would love it if you would still stick it through, because who knows, maybe you'll want to read it anyways, because as much as it is faith-based, it does deal with a lot of issues that pertains to everybody. Like, in this sense of, do we love ourselves, and can we accept ourselves and forget the sins of our past? We all have things that we wish had not happened, that we had not done. And that is why I feel like this book is so ubiquitous. It can touch any soul, whether you're Christian or not. You know, it's just basically a good moral. And so for those of you who are familiar with the Bible, and who may not be familiar with Redeeming Love, I mean, where have you been for the last, 30 years if you don't know Redeeming Love? It is based off the book of Hosea, which involves a man who God tells to marry a prostitute. And this prostitute keeps running away from him, and he keeps bringing her back until essentially she comes to Christ as well. So that is the main plot of the story. The main female protagonist is a young woman named Angel. She's 18, and she had been sold into prostitution at the tender young age of 8. And then we meet Michael Hosea. See the connection? He is a farmer. It's set in the 1850s, and so he is a farmer, and he has come to the town where she is working in the brothel, and he sees her, and God tells him, this is the woman for you. He eventually rescues her from the brothel and brings her back to his farm. But the troubles do not end there. As much as we want to say, hey, you're out of the bad life, just because we leave one situation does not mean that the other situation is going to be something we want anymore. So even though Angel wanted out of blooper. Sorry. So even though Angel wanted out of prostitution, she did not want to be a farmer's wife. She did not want, especially to be subjected to Christianity, because faith was, God was a non-entity to her. She did not want to be subjected to anybody else's will. She just wanted to live her own life and provide for herself. Obviously, according to the book of Hosea, she left and came back a couple of times until eventually she does fall in love with Michael, and they have their happily ever after. That is the short of it. The long of it, I really don't want to get into. What? Is this like a blooper reel period? My gosh, what's wrong with me? Anyways, as I had mentioned earlier, this is basically a book about redemption, about overcoming the sins of your past, because we are not always like Angel. She was 8 years old. She had no choice. And, you know, when you grow up in a certain environment, not only do you adjust to it, but it is the only life you know. So whether you want out or not, how do you get out? Sometimes situations are thrust upon us. Sometimes those are situations that we put ourselves in. And that, aside from the love angle, because every young girl loves a good love story, is what captivated my heart and my attention. My friend, so let me give you a little background, how I was introduced to Redeeming Love. My friend gave me this book, like, I don't even think it was a week preceding my spring break in college. What do you think I did the entire spring break? I read this book. I could not put this book down. There are pictures. I was at the beach. Like, you read at the beach, you hang out and do fun things, which obviously I love reading. That is fun to me. But I have pictures of me reading, and everybody's like, come on, like, do something with us. But this book, I could not put down. I think, and I will tell you, don't listen to the audiobook. Not that it's a bad audiobook, but as did I say? Whether I said it or not, I'm going to say it again. Because this is my blooper reel, so you're going to see all kinds of things that I would probably cut out and redo. Anyways, I thought that the narrator sounded old. Angel is 18, all right? So we needed more youth. And not that the narrator did a bad job, but there was a certain vibrancy that was lacking, and in her reading style, it just felt like my grandmother was telling me this story, and so there was a little bit lost in translation. So I would recommend to you to actually read the book, all right? Like, I spent $3.99 on an audiobook, and I'm glad that I caught it at $3.99 rather than buying it at $16.99, because I would have been disappointed. I would have said, why did I spend my money on that? Just because the narration did not do the book justice. So yes, I want to go back and read it with my own voice, all this, however my head can translate the story. I don't know when that will happen. So for now, I will say this is still a book I couldn't put down. Aside from some issues that I did have that I did not have when I was 21, but that just goes to experience. That goes to educating myself in the world of writing. That goes to writing styles have evolved since the early 90s. I totally recommend this book, and if you see any of the points I'm about to bring up, ignore them and just enjoy the story, because it is a story worth telling, worth hearing, worth trying to implement in your own life. Right, so my issues with this book, I had two on opposite ends of the spectrum. One was execution, like kind of mechanics, and the other was more along the story kind of plot. Let me talk about the mechanics. Head hopping, all right? We don't do that anymore, and I can see why. It was not something I remember picking up on my first, 20 reads. I don't think I actually read it 20 times, more like 10. But I found myself most engaged in the story when we stuck to one perspective. I didn't mind when we would then switch to another. However, I did mind when we are in Angel's head, but then all of a sudden, we know what Michael is thinking and feeling. It just doesn't work that way, because all of a sudden, it takes you out of the story. So, I don't know how she got away with that. I did not think head hopping was really ever acceptable, but it must have been, because every beginning writer does it. And we all get our influences from somewhere. So yes, the head hopping drove me crazy. And then my other issue on the other side of that spectrum is some of her characters I felt were a bit superfluous. And actually, this kind of goes towards her mechanics as well. She had a tendency to be over-sentimental. Like, her writing could get kind of cheesy, like the Altmans, all right? So, as I said, Michael brings Angel back to his farm, and this farm is, as you'd expect in the 1850s, in the middle of nowhere. Eventually, they come across this family that is heading towards Oregon, but their wagon has broken down. And this family is the Altmans, and in the grand scheme of life, the Altmans are kind of those people that come into your life and influence you, whether you really know it or not. But Altmans come into their life, and as representing those kinds of people, they tended to be a little too perfect, a little too sweet. Not necessarily their actions, but just the way that Rivers would describe them. And it lessened them in my eyes. Like, I kind of wish they would go away, because I wanted them to have flaws. I just didn't like the way she would, gosh, what was it? Alright, I can't find my examples, but that's just my own fault, because I did not make any notes, but it's probably not safe to write and drive. So, but she would give them terms of endearment that just made me want to throw up in my mouth a little bit. And then even Miriam. So the Altmans have 4 children, and Miriam is around Angel's age. And so while I liked Miriam in theory, and I kind of liked her in practice, I also felt like she was a little too sweet, a little too perfect, and especially concerning Paul. A little bit of backstory. The story takes place in California. Michael came to California from a plantation out east, and I don't quite know how this happened. Maybe I missed it. Maybe it was never explained. But anyways, he has a sister named Tessie. Tessie had married Paul. They came on the trail with him. And what I don't understand is, so his parents were not Christians. He became a Christian due to the influence of one of the slaves. So I don't know if Tessie was ever a Christian or if Paul was ever a Christian. But anyway, so that's kind of how this is all going to tie in. Is with Christianity, there is a big deal made out of being equally yoked, meaning that you're on the same level. You bring the same values to the table and, the same way of thinking, the same ideas on child rearing, and obviously with your faith. Like, it's really hard to agree on how to bring up your child or on how to live your lives if you see right and wrong differently. If your faiths tell you that you can live your lives in polar opposite ways, it's really hard to come together. So, Tessie dies on the trail, but Paul continues west with Michael, and eventually he takes one of the plots of land close to Michael, but then he goes to pay him for gold and strike it rich. Obviously, he gets into some other kind of lifestyle, and that is where his prejudice towards Angel comes in, because he knows she's a prostitute. He holds a grudge against her because she was a specially trained prostitute, and therefore it was more expensive to see her, and so he automatically has a grudge against her because he could never afford to get into her room. So the Altmans are there. Miriam and Angel are becoming friends, and then we're supposed to believe, spoiler alert, we're supposed to believe that Miriam is falling in love with Michael. Now, I know it's a really winding road to get to this point, but I will get there. So the thing is, obviously, Angel has demons in her past, and as she's beginning to fall in love with Michael and get further away from her old lifestyle, she has all of this guilt. She feels unworthy of a man like Michael. And so she believes that he should be with someone like Miriam, and she believes that Miriam loves Michael because Miriam has told her she loves Michael. Of course, we all know this is not a romantic love, this is a friend love, this is a brotherly love, but in the end, Miriam and Paul get together. My problem with that is, Miriam is part of, well, for one, I felt like Paul was incredibly underdeveloped. I liked his character. He was a great antagonist, and I liked how he started out as one kind of person, and then, just like Angel, he had to have his own journey of change. But I really felt like Rivers expected a lot of us in regards to him. Like, she gave us very little about him, except that he has a lot of self-loathing. Holy cow, could I please learn how to speak today? He hates himself because of the lifestyle that he had gotten into. And then at one point, when Angel ran away, he gave her a ride and they slept together. Like, he's just not a nice guy. He's a really terrible dude. And he basically said, well, that's the price of the ride. And then he hates himself and her even more because of it. But, so we're expected to understand him and to know more about who he is when we really don't get that much about him. All we know is he loathes Angel, and he really loathes himself. Miriam, who comes from this very godly family, falls in love with him. And there is nothing mentioned about being equally yoked. And that's kind of Paul's issue with Michael marrying Angel. Is he's like, why would he marry somebody like her when he is such a godly man? There are so many better women for him than her. And so I thought it was strange that Rivers would not address this issue, that Miriam could fall in love with a man who is not a Christian, or at least not living a Christian life, which you can call yourself a Christian, but not do anything about your faith, and you don't live out your faith, well, that makes you unequally yoked, because I can't live my life according to certain statutes if you're not, and if you're not going to do it, then how are we equally yoked, except that we both agree that God is real? So yeah, now I'm finally at my point where we have very little character development about Paul. And we have a little bit more about Miriam, but the fact that she falls in love with someone who, by her beliefs, she should, I mean, a lot of people can disagree about how you fall in love, but you can resist, like you can choose to stay away from people if they don't align with what you're looking for in a mate. I just found it very strange that she would let Miriam fall in love with a character without even addressing that. And then, as I said, Paul hates Angel. Miriam considers Angel a sister. So how did Miriam fall in love with a man who is so loathsome? Like, she is such a sweet girl. So what did she see in him? I mean, it's not like he hid it. I mean, sure, he was like the strong, dark, brooding type, and who doesn't love that kind of a man? But like, once she actually talked to him, what was it that she liked? Because up until the very end, he is not a likable character. So again, I thought that was really strange, and it's not something I ever noticed in my first dozen read-throughs, but this time around, I was just like, so essentially we have two flat characters. We're supposed to believe, fall in love, and we're supposed to support that? I just couldn't get behind that. Oh, there's something else in my brain and I can't remember what it is. Yeah, Angel will always be close to my heart. She, excuse me, I don't have my water. What am I going to do? I think I left it upstairs. Anyways, so the book is set into 3 parts. It's kind of like any good structure, beginning, middle, end. So the beginning is where she is sold into prostitution, where we meet her in her current state of prostitution. The middle is where, as you'd expect, she's between her 2 lives. She's between her old life and she's between the potential new life of being a Christian. Obviously, she tries to run away in the beginning, but really her attempts to flee occur in the middle because she's fighting what's happening to her and she is battling her inner demons. And then the third part really does focus on she leaves Michael for good. It goes back to she believes Michael and Miriam should be together, and she in the past had her not her handler, but the man who was in charge of the brothel that she was in, he had made it so that she couldn't have children. And she, believing that Michael would be better off with Miriam or somebody more suited to him, particularly because she knows that he wants children, she leaves for good. And this is the only selfless moment. Well, I don't know, I guess the one before that were really the only 2 times that she left because she thought it was for the good of somebody else. And when she leaves him this last time, he also says, well, I'm not going to go after her. Like, she had her reasons, and it's not going to be up to me for her to come back this time. So when she leaves, she ends up in San Francisco, and she does become a Christian, and she starts kind of a halfway house for women who had been like her, who were in a position that they wanted out of, but they had no marketable skills. So the only thing they could do was to sleep with men. But that was a profession that was looked down upon. That's a profession they don't want to be part of. But how do you get out of a pit without a ladder? So she basically opens this home so that they can prepare women. They can teach them how to cook, how to read, how to sew, how to do things so that they can go into the world and have a more meaningful profession. And then Miriam sends Paul to get her, and of course Paul's like, it's been 3 years, and he's like, I still hate this woman, look what he's done to everybody. And in a sense, he needed to be the one to find her and try to bring her back. because he needed to see that he was wrong. He never gave her a chance. He always just made assumptions. He ends up bringing her back, and as I said, there's a happily ever after. I kind of had issues with Michael in that, again, he was a little too perfect. There were moments where he definitely lost his cool, but on the whole, I wish he had more flaws. But that's just me, and that's my over-analytical brain. I'm sure a lot of the issues that I found this time around, nobody else will ever recognize, because I've never met another living soul who has said anything bad about redeeming love. Which reminds me, they're coming out with a movie, like, hopefully, now that COVID has gotten its claws into us, who knows what the future of our entertainment industry looks like, but I will be the first in line to see that movie, no matter what issues I found in the book. I think the movie will be fantastic. She does have a number of other books. I think I just need to go to bed. She has a number of other books that are all Christian fiction. I have read 3, I think. There's Atonement Child and Scarlet Thread that I can definitely think of that I've read. And they're so hard to read. Actually, the Scarlet Thread, I actually tried to listen to, and it was so boring. Oh, that's another one that I read. Can't remember what it's called. But anyway, sorry. Scarlet Thread I tried to listen to, and I'm pretty sure it was the same narrator as Redeeming Love, and it was just too boring. But again, I feel like that's just the narration. I do not remember being bored by it when I read it. But Atonement Child is a book that, after, I don't know, 5, 6, 10 years since my last read, it was very difficult for me to read, because it deals with a young woman who is raped and becomes pregnant by the rape. And she's a Christian. She goes to a Christian school, and her fiance is studying to be a minister, and her whole world rejects her for something that wasn't her fault, and rejects her for deciding to keep the baby, which is completely counter to how Christians should behave. So it was one that I had to put down, not because it was a bad book, but because I was at a point in my life where I could truly grasp what all of that meant, and it made me so angry I couldn't keep going. So I totally recommend her other books. Now I remember what that one was called, Bridge to Haven. That one I have not read. I only listened to it on an audiobook, and I'm like 99.9% sure it's the same narrator, and that was my biggest issue with it. I mean, there were some things that I didn't really quite care for with the main protagonist, but the narrator, she is just not my favorite. I think Rivers, or whoever's in charge of finding narrators, needs to switch, because if that's what 3 books narrated by the same woman, I'm pretty sure they're all narrated by her. So maybe they should redo these audiobooks with a new narrator. I would love, as always, I say it and I mean it every single time, I want to know, have you read Redeeming Love? What do you think? Have you read any of her other books? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think this is something that a non-Christian would be interested in reading? Because honestly, I go to Goodwill, and you'll just find copies of this book, and I'll buy them for like 50 cents, and I give them to all my friends. This is the one book that I give to everybody, that I recommend to everybody, and I would still recommend, despite the flaws, despite how I don't love it as much as I used to. But it will remain in a place of honor on my bookshelf. No matter where I move, it will come with me, and I don't know if I'll read it. Hey, I underlined some things. I will probably not read it once a year, but I'll probably crack it open every 5 years, depending on how much I miss it. So, I know this was a crazy video, but thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you later. Bye.